Welcome to Legalized Negligence, where we talk about Florida Statute 768.21 subsection 8. This morning, I wanted to do a quick video on why it is so important what you say when you speak to your legislators. And I want to back up just a little bit. I won't drag on about this, but I want to give you a little bit of history about how my Facebook group and website came about. Some of you know my mom died in May of 2020 due to a nurse's negligence. She left a fall prevention bed alarm turned off even after she was notified of the safety violation. She still left it off. And my mom tried to get out of bed and she fell and injured herself and died nearly 3 weeks later, 18 days later. And the first attorney that I hired told me about this law, and he also said, if you can find a way to prove ordinary negligence versus medical malpractice, there may be a way for you to get into the court. And so for a year and a half, I worked on that, and I would send him stuff, and he would send me letters back, and he'd say, yeah, you're on the right track, keep digging, keep digging. And so I finally found this case, National Deaf Academy v. Towns, where the Supreme Court of Florida had made a determination, an opinion about the difference between medical malpractice and ordinary negligence. So I thought I was heading in the right direction. Sent that to my attorney, and then he started backpedaling. And so I gave him some time and gave him some tasks, and he didn't complete those tasks. So I fired him. And now I'm down to roughly 6 months before the statute of limitations is going to run. So I started sending letters out to law firms all across Florida, wound up sending out 85 in total. And there was one particular one who wrote me back. And then he called me, and we spent about an hour on the phone. And during that conversation, he asked me what he said, you're talking about the Florida free kill law. And I said, what did you just say? And he said, Florida free kill. I said, I've never heard that. Now, keep in mind, I'm a year and a half into this. And so I looked it up, and sure enough, there's all kinds of information about Florida free kill. And I eventually found a group that said that their mission was to repeal this law. And I thought, well, great, I'll get in touch with these people and see what I can contribute to that and what I can learn from them. And it took me weeks before anybody ever wrote back to me. And when they did, they invited me to a Zoom meeting, which I attended. And as I was allowed to tell my story, which I kept it very brief. And when I started telling them what this attorney had said to me, he explained why lawyers are reluctant to take on these cases. The owner of the group called me a liar, and it kind of shocked me, so I just stayed quiet. I did attend a second meeting with them, and in that meeting, I shared with them information about other ways to approach getting into the civil court. And the group owner told me that they weren't going to waste their time reading anything, that they believe just telling the story about what happened to their loved one was enough to get some change made. And I said, well, it's been 32 years at this point and nothing's really happened. Don't you think a different approach might be the way to go? And I was just, summarily dismissed. So I stopped attending that group and started out on my own. And that was the beginning of my Facebook group. I thought I could get some other people interested and involved. And in the beginning, the first name I had for my Facebook group was Florida Free Kill Families Speak Out. And it stayed that way for a little while until I heard a lawyer speaking, a lobbyist, at a committee hearing in Tallahassee, and I heard him absolutely destroy the use of the term free kill. And I immediately thought, I got to distance myself from that, because he made a very good case. And if you use the term free kill, you kind of start looking like, one of these extremist activists. And, that kind of went along with my thinking on, we need to approach this either by making a different case in the courts or making a different case to the legislature. And so I changed the name of my group to Legalized Negligence, because that's what it seemed to me. The negligence of these doctors and nurses or medical licensees had been legalized. Well, by this time, Travis and I had been talking, in fact, almost on a daily basis on the phone and through email. And I mentioned that to him. I said, I really want to get away from the use of that term free kill. And I came up with the term legalized negligence. And he immediately registered the domain name. And then he set it up so that the domain name would lead you to a YouTube account. And we started creating podcasts. So now you know how we came about. Now I want to get into why what you say when you speak to your legislators is so very important. At the beginning of it was 2023, before the legislature went into session at the beginning of 2023, some people had contacted me and they said, we like your approach. You're kind of getting away from just telling the story about what happened to your loved one, and you're talking more about legal avenues to take so that we can make some changes. And I helped a couple of people write their presentation that they were going to say at the delegation meetings. And, me and Travis were now working together more closely, and we were coming up with ideas. We were reading reports. We were reading task force studies. We were reading court cases. We were reading law. And the point that I was trying to make to people is it's one thing to tell the story about how your loved one died. That's absolutely important. It's vital. You could see in the video we did yesterday how these lawmakers looked at these people in their face, and they were confronted with the reality of medical malpractice, and especially the little girl whose her hand was falling off. I mean, they had to look at that in real life, so that part of it is very important. But when you get to the end of that story, the legislators always ask, so what do you want from us? And that's the part that legalized negligence focuses on. What is it that we say to them that gets them to reevaluate subsection 8 and to get them to repeal it? And I'm going to share a screen. There's a couple of books that I have mentioned several times. And I think these books, I wish I had found these earlier, to be honest with you. The first book is called The Medical Malpractice Myth by Tom Baker. He's an attorney, and he's written extensively about the myth of medical malpractice. And I discovered in the footnotes in his book, they led me to this second book, the one there on your right, called Medical Malpractice Litigation, How It Works, Why Tort Reform Hasn't Helped. And you could read the authors' names down there: Bernard Black, David Hyman, and there's 3 others. And so I bought that book and I read it, and there is just a tremendous amount of research that went into these 2 books over the past, since the mid-70s, when this really became a national issue. And these 2 books debunk the stories that the lobbyists are telling to the legislators. So I thought, well, if I have that knowledge, then that's something that I can share with people like Senator Yarborough, Senator Book, Senator Harrell, and Senator Tops, and the rest of them that were in that meeting yesterday. And so I recently looked up Tom Baker online, and there's 2 short videos that I found with him. The first one is only about 2 minutes and 25 seconds long, and the second one is slightly over 4 minutes. So what I want to do is share those two, and I want you to hear what he has to say. I'm going to share the first one, and then I'll change over and share the second. So just listen to what he has to say. Remember, this book was written a number of years ago. He is an attorney, and his father, and I believe it's his father-in-law, are both doctors. So he's very vested in this topic.
There are more people who die from medical malpractice every year than from automobile accidents and workplace accidents combined. The idea, at core level, the idea of medical malpractice is that a failure to observe the ordinary standards of care in the medicine that then leads to an injury that causes harm to the plaintiff. The medical malpractice myth is that the reason we have problems with healthcare in our society is because of medical malpractice litigation. And I would say the core myth is that the litigation is the problem rather than medical malpractice. And we have a big problem with medical errors and medical mistakes in our society. And the sad part about this myth is that if we think the problem is these bad lawsuits, then we don't confront the real problem, which is that it's not as safe as it really should be to go to the doctor. The reality about medical malpractice litigation, there's really a few parts to it, which is, first, most people who are injured and eligible don't sue. The second reality of medical malpractice litigation is that it's not growing, that the same number of people are bringing cases today as were bringing cases in the late 1980s. The other reality of medical malpractice litigation is that the legal system does a good job of weeding out the weaker claims and letting the stronger claims get paid. The public should care for two reasons. One, when they go to the hospital, they want to feel safe. And medical liability, fear of medical liability, is one of the few things that can actually encourage a hospital to be safe. And then secondly, they should care because, God forbid, something happens to them, they should have the ability to recover. And the medical malpractice myth is making that hard.
Okay, that's the first one. Now I'm going to move over to the second one. It's a little bit longer. It's about twice the length of that one, but it's important to hear what Mr. Baker has to say.
What a cap does is it makes the most deserving cases less valuable. Because these caps are caps on non-economic damages, and no one is hitting up against the cap in a case that's a marginal case. The cap is about taking money away from the most deserving people. And so what a cap does is it's a way of transferring money. If you think about it, a cap transfers money from this deserving person who's been badly injured and puts it in the pocket of the hospitals and the doctors. A cap says to a doctor that the patient's life isn't as valuable as the legal system otherwise would say, or as people would say. After all, the caps are put on to keep juries from awarding damages that they determine to be the right amount of money to compensate for this mistake. So a cap says that these plaintiffs are not valuable human beings. And then secondly, it also says to the hospital or to the doctor that you don't have to have responsibility for your actions. People have done research on this, and caps are discriminatory. Caps affect women more than men. Caps affect children more than other people. Caps affect the elderly more than other people. And also caps will disproportionately impact the ability of someone who makes less money, who doesn't fit into one of those categories, but it affects their ability to get a lawyer. because the lawyer knows that the lost wages of that person are going to be less. And caps don't affect lost wages, and they don't affect healthcare costs. What they affect is the pain and suffering, loss of enjoyment of life, those other things that go to compensate people for the deprivation of their dignity. One, the idea that medical malpractice caps will lower the cost of healthcare is absolutely not borne out. I mean, that medical liability insurance costs are such a small percentage of our huge healthcare budget in America that it doesn't have any impact on that. It's a rounding error. It's the hair on the tip of the tail of the dog of the costs of healthcare. But if we think about what are the costs of medical errors, that medical liability reform doesn't reduce those costs, because those costs are borne by the people who are injured, and which are then shifted to the public hospital if they're not able to collect, or shifted to that school system if there's a child that needs extra treatment and the family doesn't have the money for it, shifted to families and neighbors and communities. The costs don't go away. We can't wave a magic wand and make the cost of medical injury go away. If anything, I think that medical liability caps increase those costs, because when hospitals, especially, and also doctors, are not fully responsible for what they're going to do, they're going to be less safe. And that's going to mean more injuries, which means more costs of medical mistakes. The real problem is that there's too much medical injuries, and that not enough people who are eligible for bringing a malpractice lawsuit bring it. So if we wanted to have reform that was going to address the real problem rather than the myth, there would be two parts to it. One, we would require more disclosure, and we would back that up with a serious auditing and other kind of sanction. The second thing is that we'd make it easier for people to bring a lawsuit, not harder. We would not cap damages. We would not set up 3 different hurdles that someone has to jump over in order to get to the courthouse. We would make it easier for people to bring a lawsuit, because that's what they're entitled to do under our legal system.
You know, I can't encourage you enough to buy those 2 books. You can find them on Amazon. The Medical Malpractice Myth and Medical Malpractice Litigation. Find them on Amazon. Let me get those straight. Read them, gain some knowledge, have something to cite when you talk to your legislators. You heard Senator Yarborough in that video yesterday say that he wants people to send him information. Well, this is the why it's so important what you say part, because if you spend your time retelling your story over and over and over again, you never do get them what they need in order to form a new opinion about this. I'm not saying your story isn't important. It angers me every time I recall what happened to my mom, and I think about her laying on the floor screaming in pain, and it took the nurses over 5 minutes to find her because they had turned off the bed alarm. And I'm thinking about my 92-year-old mother laying on the floor in agony. COVID precautions and restrictions kept us from being able to go to her bedside. And it was like she was being held hostage and tortured, by these people. I still live with those thoughts. But telling that story to Senator Yarborough is not going to help. What's going to help is to provide him the hard data, the studies that's going to turn his thinking around and persuade him to think differently than the past 33 legislatures have thought. So that's what I mean when I say it's important what you say to them. So take some time out of your day, read a book, learn a thing, and arm yourself with knowledge so that when you get the legislators' attention, you have something to share with them that will be beneficial. So I'm going to go ahead and get this video uploaded later today. Travis and I are going to record part 2 of our breakdown of the Senate meeting yesterday. Thanks for joining me. Like, subscribe, click the notification, whatever all that stuff is that people say. And as always, we're not attorneys. We're just a couple of guys out there trying to battle our way through a legal system that we have no education in, and trying to find a way to seek justice for what happened to our loved ones when they died. Have a great day.